Working through the research and script for this video has been the hardest that I've done. A big reason that I do this channel is because I hate lies that will actually harm people. Telling Sophane that those genes don't make his ass look fat, who cares? Tell people that a toxic substance with no medicinal value will cure their cancer, I will be yelling from the rooftops. This isn't just some snake oil I'm talking about tonight. Under its various names, whether laetrile, amygdalin, or vitamin B17, this chemical and its pushers are directly responsible for pain, suffering, and death. This isn't a funny topic, and it's not easy to accept the fact that people find themselves dragged into such an obvious con. But I'll do my best to explain the history and the facts around vitamin B17, and maybe we'll find a way to add in a few laughs for all of our sakes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, InaneDragon, and tonight's Inane Explanations is vitamin B17.
Today's video is going to be about B17. B17. If you don't know about it, stay tuned, because I'm going to show you what it is.
Now that I've poisoned the well, what is it that the proponents of vitamin B17 claim for themselves? Just how is this substance supposed to prevent or even cure cancer? It should be something of a clue that the answer varies with who and when you ask. I will do my best to present each of the claimed mechanisms for vitamin B17 as honestly and completely as I can. To do so, I'll be using footage from videos made by the proponents of this alternative medicine.
By definition, I begin, alternative medicine, I continue, has either not been proved to work or been proved not to work. Do you know what they call alternative medicine that's been proved to work? Medicine.
Sorry, we'll give them a fair shake before taking the piss out of them. The first and most recurring claim is that amygdalin isn't a vitamin, but an actual anti-cancer agent. Under this hypothesis, amygdalin preferentially releases hydrogen cyanide into cancer cells, but not into healthy cells. I'll let Dr. Jimenez explain.
Laetrile has cyanide, and so many people say, oh, this can be toxic, but this is the mechanism of action. Cancer cells have an enzyme called beta-glucosidase, which normal cells do not have. So when one ingests laetrile, or B17, it's not selective for cancer cells only. Some normal cells absorb laetrile. However, because normal cells do not have that enzyme that cancer cells have, called beta-glucosidase, then when laetrile penetrates a cancer cell, that enzyme breaks up the laetrile molecule and causes the release of cyanide. So that's a very simple mechanism of action, that the cyanide on contact kills those cancer cells. When laetrile or B17 penetrates a normal cell, since it doesn't have that beta-glucosidase enzyme, then it converts the laetrile into something called thiocyanates, which is totally non-toxic to normal cells.
Contrary to what this asshole says, there is no research suggesting that cancer reliably has more beta-glucosidase than regular cells. There is some research suggesting that some cancer cells may have some more beta-glucosidase than the base tissue from which the tumor grew. Now, that's not the same thing as having more beta-glucosidase than any other tissue in the human body, not by a mile. Nor does it mean that it's enough of a difference to matter with regards to the rate at which the cell metabolizes amygdalin. Further, there is no research suggesting that cancer cells appreciably lack rhodinase compared to other cells. In fact, the only study I found that suggested any cancer cells might have any less rhodinase emphasized that the difference in quantities was insignificant. Worse still, you are lying about both chemicals. First, beta-glucosidase is not the only method by which the body can break amygdalin into hydrogen cyanide. if you are ingesting vitamin C, this will accelerate the production of cyanide from amygdalin, so don't give us this targeted bullshit. Second, Rhodonase has no effect on amygdalin. Rhodonase helps turn cyanide into the less toxic thiocyanate, which means that its presence won't inhibit amygdalin hydrolysis into cyanide. And if you're taking high doses of amygdalin, let me remind my viewers, if you inhale cyanide gas, that same rhodonase is still in your cells and you still die of cyanide poisoning. So how exactly is this supposed to be different from high doses of amygdalin? We've established that as far as amygdalin is concerned, the difference between cancer and normal cells has not been demonstrated. We've established that beta-glucosidase isn't required to produce cyanide from amygdalin, and we've established that rhodonase doesn't inhibit cyanide production, nor is necessarily sufficient to prevent cyanide toxicity. In other words, you have lied, and you are wrong. Even better, thiocyanate, which Dr. Jimenez calls completely non-toxic. Yeah, the thing is, it's not as toxic as cyanide. But you really don't want a high concentration of this in you. It'll give you the runs, anemia, shock, and convulsions. Death is a real possibility, but you're more likely to die of the cyanide first, as the amount of laetrile that you've taken swamps production of the cyanide and wipes out your ability to protect yourself with rhodonase. I think I've shown that this claim doesn't make sense as a mechanism of action. Laetrile, amygdalin, whatever you call it, it can't tell what's cancer from what's you. And even the byproducts are potentially fatal. But what about the people who are calling it vitamin B17? How is that related to mutations of cells into cancer? Just our luck, we've got another self-proclaimed expert on taking cyanide for a healthier life.
Can you explain the function of apricot kernels in the human body?
Well, the apricot kernels are merely the carrier of the chemical. The chemical is amygdalin, and some people call it laetrile or vitamin B17. But it's really not the apricot kernel, it's the substance of amygdalin. It's this molecule that's found in nature in 1,400 edible plants, approximately. Apricot seeds are just one of them. Happens to be one of the best sources. It's easy to get. You can grow them in most parts of the world. And they're loaded. It's about, I think the last time I checked the figures, about 3 or 3.25% amygdalin by volume. It's a pretty strong dose. And on the other food sources that have that high a concentration are other fruits in the rosacea family, like prunes and peaches and things like that. Also, apple seeds have a very high concentration. But anyway, regardless of its source, the role in the human body, in my view, is to keep the healing process of the body in balance. And the reason I say that is because, in my view, cancer is not unnatural at all. It's a perfectly natural function. It's the healing process. When tissue is damaged, the body immediately goes to work to repair it, and new cells start to grow. It's normal. It's healing. And when those cells are replaced, let's say if I were to scratch my skin here, you know, I just got rid of probably a couple of thousand cells. I can't see them, but I've scratched them off. Well, the body knows those cells now have to be replaced. So it's right now starting the process of growing new cells for my skin. Well, when those cells are finally grown back, then there is a very sophisticated, very beautifully balanced mechanism that the body engages in that says, stop, the healing is over now. You can go back to whatever else you were doing. But if the chemistry in the body is lacking, or if something is interfering with the electrical signals, and it's a combination of chemistry and electricity, then the body doesn't say stop. It says continue. It doesn't give the stop signal. And so the body overheals. And that's kind of an oversimplified way of describing the cancer process. So cancer is not really unnatural at all. It's a natural process that's gone awry.
Well, no, we know how healing works, and we have a pretty good understanding of how cancer happens. And the one process is not the other. The only relation between the two is cell division. But more importantly, amygdalin has no function in the human healing process or in cell division. It's just not a vitamin by any definition of the word. About the only thing it would be good for is overcoming cancer's avoidance of programmed cell death, and that's by flooding your body with enough cyanide to kill you. Amygdalin is not a vitamin by any accepted medical or nutritional standard. It's that simple. So the mechanism of action is bullshit. No matter which version you hear, surely for an alternative medicine, there's more to the story than just how these erroneous claims about its function, right? Of course there is.
I took 500 milligrams of it twice a day, and it wiped out 5 tumors.
Amygdalin was first isolated in the 1800s. Soon after its isolation, it was considered as a possible anti-cancer treatment by doctors in Germany. But fairly quickly, they abandoned it due to its inefficacy and concerns about its toxicity. That's right. By the close of the 19th century, we had already established the two most important facts about amygdalin. 1, it isn't an anti-cancer treatment. 2, it is toxic due to its cyanide content. What the hell happened that we're still talking about this over a century later? Yes, it's fair to say that sometimes we are wrong. Those German doctors could have been wrong about amygdalin, and we've had that century to improve medical technology and experimental protocols. Even today, we do still see the occasional study that attempts to show that amygdalin has anti-cancer effects. And not one rigorous study of the chemical has turned up anything positive. But that is where the doctor's Krebs, snake oil salesmanship, and a bit of rebrand come into the picture half of a century after those German scientists abandoned it.
You might not believe this. Cancer is not a disease, but is a business. And the word called cancer is nothing more than a lie.
The exact story changes depending on which regulatory agency is enforcing which law at which time, but amygdalin resurfaced as an anti-cancer treatment in the 1950s, with father-son team, Dr. Krebs, and not a doctor, Krebs Jr. Dr. Krebs, the senior, was a modest general practitioner who peddled a number of fraudulent treatments for decades, before he began using a modified form of amygdalin called laetrile. Laetrile was either developed as a boiled version of aqueous amygdalin, a derivative of a mold used in bourbon flavoring extract production, or a modification of one of these two produced by Krebs the Jr. Yeah, for a supposed medicine formulated in the last 100 years, not even its advocates could honestly tell you where it came from. In general, this sort of obfuscation should be a warning sign to anyone. The Krebs initially made the same basic claim as Dr. Jimenez, that laetrile would selectively target cancer cells for the release of cyanide. The FDA prohibited the manufacture or sale of the drug when investigations failed to find any scientific or medical support for this claim. Like all genuine scientists, instead of admitting that they had wrongly and prematurely introduced a drug to market, the Krebs moved production to Mexico, beyond the reach of drug quality controls. It was after numerous bans and legal battles that the Krebs suddenly discovered that their anti-cancer agent was actually an essential vitamin. Vitamins, it is worth noting, have far less regulatory limits imposed upon them. Might be a clue. This is yet another warning sign. Changing the claim after your original story becomes legally inconvenient isn't what good doctors or scientists do. Of course, the fact that the newly christened vitamin B17 is the second bogus vitamin discovered by the Krebs should really count as a third warning sign for those of you whom are paying attention. That's right, the same father-son team marketed vitamin B15, pangamic acid, as a treatment for heart disease and cancer, amongst other ailments. It's worth pointing out that despite research performed in Russia, there's insufficient evidence to support any health claim related to pangamic acid and vitamin B15. So yes, let's call this amygdalin's third historical strike and move beyond the Krebs to the work of actual researchers.
So laetrile can be given safely without any possibilities of toxicity.
Over the course of B17's history, there have been multiple attempts to ascertain its efficacy and method of action. I first have to say that some recent studies have shown that amygdalin may have a number of positive effects on cancer cells in very specific cases that don't appear to translate to actual cancer in humans. For example, none of the studies I have seen administered amygdalin through any method other than direct site injection straight into the tumor. In a scenario where cancer has metastasized, this approach obviously cannot be used. Better yet, the cancer was often just a tumor in a petri dish, so there were no risks of poisoning a host. But of course, none of these studies really matter, because when 385,000 physicians were invited to submit patient records of a supposed cures by laetrile, a total of 93 cases were ultimately produced, despite claims at that time that 70,000 people had been using laetrile. The National Cancer Institute conducted a blind review of the best of these 93 cases, along with an equal number of cases of traditional treatment and cases where no treatment had been provided. In the end, the panel of oncologists reviewing the cases could not provide a definitive conclusion supporting anti-cancer activity for laetrile. Amygdalin has been tried in at least 23 animal cancer studies, and in every case, there has been no reproducible positive effect. The majority of screenings by the National Cancer Institute were completely negative, whether human or animal, and the few exceptions could not be reproduced. In spite of this, and under political pressure, a clinical trial of amygdalin was performed with an initial pool of 179 terminal cancer patients. 2 separate courses of amygdalin were developed, along with a high vitamin therapy modeled after the standard practices of the chemicals proponents at that time, which I should point out, since we brought up how vitamin C can metabolize amygdalin into cyanide, included high doses of vitamin C. Over the course of this study, no patient showed any sign of improvement. Several had to be removed from the study due to cyanide poisoning. It is fair to say that the poisoning was usually due to a failure of strictly following the specific regimen produced by the trial's administrators. But of course, it's also fair to remind you that time that you doubled up on your antibiotic because you forgot to take the previous night's dose. One patient, however, went into tachycardia and suffered extreme difficulty breathing from nothing more than the intravenous dose given her, in line with the dosage recommendations of laetrile's pushers. By the end of the study, every participant had shown progression of their cancer ravaging their bodies, and 152 had died of their cancer. The rates of progression and death were in line with what you would expect for patients not being treated for cancer at all. They didn't even meet placebo.
If you define controversy as the extent to which a lot of people are, debating it and having discussions on it, probably it's not. But those who are interested in it and, are really anxious to pursue knowledge about it, you get into the controversy as much as ever because, the orthodox medical profession still insists that there's nothing but, chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. And so anything that challenges that gets to be controversial almost by definition.
Laetrile amygdalin vitamin B17, whatever you want to call it, is demonstrably as effective as doing nothing, but with the added benefit of possibly poisoning yourself. No matter what marginal effects amygdalin might have in highly controlled experiments, it has been proven not to work as an anti-cancer remedy in actual humans with actual cancer. Laetrile amygdalin vitamin B17, its real name is snake oil. The people selling this crap line their pocket with cheap cash from desperate victims. There's more that can be said on this topic, to the point where someone could practically make a career digging into it. And if you'd like to hear more from me on it, let me know in the comments. As always, like and share the video to pad out my ego. And for those who would rather not give their hard-earned money to poison peddlers, consider making a donation to my Patreon instead. Everything earned there goes back into this channel, including paying for the journal accesses, books, and print paper needed to pull this project together. Many thanks to my current patrons who have helped make this happen. Thank you all, and have a good night.